the Norse heating hack that turned ice caves into warm shelters. Cold kills faster than hunger. The Vikings knew that, and that's why they learned how to turn ice itself into protection instead of a death sentence. That sounds backwards, almost wrong. Ice is supposed to drain heat, not save it. Yet in the far north, where trees were scarce, storms were relentless, and firewood could mean the difference between life and death, Norse people discovered a heating trick that let frozen caves become surprisingly livable shelters. Not cosy, not comfortable, but warm enough to survive nights that could freeze exposed skin solid in minutes. And the clever part isn't magic or myth. It's physics, observation, and brutal trial and error. This is exactly the kind of forgotten survival knowledge that kept people alive long before modern gear showed up to rescue us. All right, let's get into it. Why, you might ask, can ice actually be warmer than air? Here's the part most people miss. In extreme cold, exposed air is the real enemy. Wind strips heat from the body incredibly fast, and fluctuating temperatures just make things worse. Ice, on the other hand, is stable. Once it forms, it locks in a consistent internal temperature, usually right around freezing. For a human body trying to stay alive, -1 degree Celsius inside an ice shelter is far better than -30 outside, with wind just screaming through your clothes. The Norse didn't need thermometers to figure this out. They noticed that snow-covered animals survived storms better than those in the open. They saw that fish stayed alive under ice long after surface water froze. Over time, this understanding shaped how they used frozen landscapes as shelter rather than obstacles. Ice wasn't warmth, it was insulation. Ice caves as emergency architecture. Natural ice caves formed in glaciers, snowdrifts and packed coastal ice were common across Scandinavia, Iceland and Greenland. The Norse didn't carve elaborate tunnels like modern ice hotels. They used what already existed. A hollow beneath a drift, a collapsed snowbank against rock, a melt pocket inside glacier ice. What mattered was enclosure. Once inside, wind dropped to 0. That alone could raise the perceived temperature by tens of degrees. Add body heat, a small oil lamp, or even a single flame, and the space stabilized fast. The key rule was simple. Never touch bare ice longer than necessary. Contact pulls heat away instantly. Norse shelters used layers to prevent that problem. The hidden heating hack layers and traps. This is where things get clever. Norse survival shelters inside ice weren't just empty caves, they were engineered using basic heat traps. The floor was always raised slightly, often with packed snow, animal skins, driftwood, or even seaweed. Cold air sinks, so lifting the sleeping area even a few inches made a difference. Entrances were kept low and narrow. Heat rises, but cold air pools near the ground. A low entrance trapped warmer air inside while allowing cold air to settle near the opening, instead of the sleeping area. Inside the cave, surfaces were often smoothed rather than jagged. Rough ice, creates more surface area, which accelerates heat loss. Smooth walls reduce airflow turbulence and help maintain stable temperature. This wasn't accidental. It was learned through generations of freezing mistakes. Fire without melting the roof. Now, let's address the risky part. Fire and ice don't usually mix well. The Norse rarely used open flames inside ice shelters. Instead, they relied on controlled heat sources. Oil lamps made from stone or clay, fueled by whale oil or seal fat, produce steady heat with minimal flame. These lamps also emitted light, which really mattered during those long polar nights. The lamps were placed low and shielded. Heat rose gently instead of blasting the ceiling. Smoke was minimal, but ventilation still mattered. Small vent holes were often carved upward at an angle to release smoke while preventing heat escape. The goal wasn't warmth like a hearth. It was thermal balance. Enough heat to counter body loss without triggering collapse. And yes, they tested this the hard way. Clothing did half the work, you know. Shelter alone wasn't enough. The Norse, well, they layered aggressively. Wool was the backbone. It insulates even when wet, something cotton fails at completely. Fur was added for wind resistance. Inner layers trapped air, and outer layers blocked moisture and drafts. Inside ice shelters, folks often slept fully clothed, wrapped in skins, with shared body heat doing the rest. This wasn't discomfort. It was survival math. You know, multiple people in a small ice cave could actually raise internal temperatures noticeably. That's just basic thermodynamics in action, really. Why did ice shelters outperform wooden huts? Well, this might surprise you, but in some conditions ice shelters were actually better than wooden ones. Wooden huts, they tend to leak air. Cracks form, and the wind just sneaks right in. Firewood, it runs out quicker than you'd hope. But ice shelters, once they're formed, required almost no fuel to keep the temperature steady. And, you know, during blizzards, snow piling up actually improved the insulation. The thicker the snow layer got, the more stable the internal environment became. That's why, you know, Arctic cultures across the world independently arrived at similar solutions. The Norse weren't copying anyone. They were just responding to the same brutal problem with the same physics. When ice became a last resort, it wasn't about comfort. Ice caves weren't permanent homes. They were emergency shelters, hunting stops, storm refuges, and survival backups when ships were lost or travel went wrong. Saga accounts and archaeological evidence suggest that Norse explorers in Greenland and Iceland relied on snow and ice shelters during seasonal travel. These structures weren't romantic, they were pragmatic. If your choice was freezing in the open or sleeping inside ice, you pick the ice. Every time. What modern survivalists can learn, you know, is that this knowledge still matters, even today. In cold survival situations, The instinct is often to avoid snow and ice entirely. But that instinct, well, it can get you killed. Snow can be shaped and ice can block wind. Temperature stability matters more than just surface warmth. Modern survival training still teaches snow caves, trench shelters and quinsy huts for a reason. The principles haven't changed in 1,000 years. You know, insulation beats heat production. And, well, wind protection beats fire. Stability, it always beats comfort. The Norse didn't survive because they were tougher. No, they survived because they understood their environment deeply and used it instead of fighting it. The real legacy of this hack, well, it wasn't some trick written in a manual. No, it was a living skill, passed down quietly, refined by experience, and, you know, respected because failure meant death. Ice caves weren't miracles, they were smart compromises. They turned the cold into something predictable. And in survival, predictability is power. That's the lesson worth remembering. If this kind of forgotten knowledge fascinates you, well, you're in the right place. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe to Legacy of Survival, and share this story with someone who thinks warmth always comes from fire. History has a lot more to teach us, and honestly, we're just getting started.